Oh, it's terrible. He'll never get a woman. It's unfortunate.
It's like those images, like, oh, inside of you there's two wolves.
Who's the second wolf?
Here.
What do you mean? Okay.
I know for a fact a lot of you are extremely happy with Bellone's release. And I'm not talking about the people who like his character or his design or even the ones who think his kit looks fun. No, I'm talking about you. Yes, you who had to spend hundreds of pull on the Wang and Chen banner because the game just decided to give you 5 copies of the up you didn't want and now you're completely dry. Because it's a popular belief that Bellone is just your average mid-up and the Hypergriff releases to cater to a more niche audience. Which is actually crazy of a situation to be in given how much this guy's kit can do. From AFK to one of the strongest debuffing capabilities in the game to one of the highest total skill damages among the physical damage dealers. So let's analyze his kit. That way you can understand why even despite having all that, a lot of people think Bellone is mid. And so you can decide if you want to pull him or not. He's starting with S1. I don't think I need to repeat myself for the 1000th time about how S1s are usually the simplest skill in a 6-star kit. But being simple doesn't mean it's bad. And every once in a while we do get some pretty good S1s that can do a decent job on their own. Which is the case for Bellone here. If you know even a little about brawlers, then you're probably also aware that both 6-stars we have in this archetype are mostly used for their AFK skills. Something they are very good at, especially considering their extremely low DP and SP cost and infinite duration skills with AoE capability. But Bellone's case is actually very different from the other two, because his S1, which is the AFK skill in his kit, is actually extremely basic. Almost boring really in terms of how many effects it has compared to Mountain and Chongyue. As you can see, it's just a simple offensive recovery skill that deals 250% of his attack as physical damage and strikes twice once it's charged. So if you consider Mountain's S2 to be the baseline, since he was the first of the 3 to be released, Chongyue took that idea much higher by gaining extra range and dealing more damage, while Bellone just apparently dials it back with a weaker version of it that doesn't have unlimited duration. But it's here that the rest of his kit actually starts to shine, because despite it being much simpler than the others, this S1 still manages to be situationally competitive in a lot of cases. With one of the reasons for that being Talent 1. When you unlock his module, what it does is make so every time Bellone attacks someone, that mob will have their defense reduced by 8% for 10 seconds, stacking up to 5 times. And the lower the target's HP, the more damage he'll deal, up to a maximum of 42% bonus damage when they reach 20% HP or lower. These are the most important effects in his entire kit, and you could say all of his skills revolve around this talent. At max stacks, he's able to reduce any mob's defense by 40%, which is only a bit weaker than Shamer's though, for instance. He does need to attack multiple times to reach that, but it's here that the brawler archetype shines, since Bellone's attack interval is less than 1 second. Not to mention how his module also gives him 10 attack speed if he's above 50% HP, so attacking a mob 5 times takes less than 4 seconds and leaves a very comfortable margin for him to keep reapplying it over and over for permanent uptime. And this is just a defense reduction, but like I said, this talent also gives him damage increase the lower his target's HP gets. This bonus damage scales linearly as their health goes down until it reaches its cap once they drop to 20% HP, and when you combine these two effects together, they really help increase Bellone's damage, which is how we get back to S1, because it's all these things done to one does that manage to save this skill from being below average to a somewhat good power level, since he is able to scale very well with defensive stats. Even his lack of infinite uptime isn't a big deal, again because of his archetype, since S1 only has a 3 SP cost, so it takes less than 2 seconds for Bellone to charge it. The result is that he's actually very competitive with the other two, especially when enemy defense increases. Even I actually do use S1 a lot on CN despite having Mountain and Chongyue there because of how easy it is to just drop him on a lane and forget about it. There are however some disadvantages with it, and they all more or less have to do with how basic the skill is. Like I said, he can compete with the others in terms of scaling, but that doesn't take it into account that there's basically zero utility in here. Mountain has 2 block counts and self-heal, while Chonga's has increased the range and splash damage. Because of that, they're both much more comfortable to use compared to Bellone's S1, who even with the insane defense shred and extra damage from talent, one will still fall reload a lot more easily against the bigger waves, so he isn't as reliable as the others for AFK. The good thing is that unlike them, this is far from being Bellone's main skill. It's more of a bonus that introduces how good his talent 1 is than anything. Because of that, I don't think it's a requirement to get masteries here unless it really feels like you're in need of more AFK options. Just know that it probably won't be the strongest skill for that area, but still capable of doing a competent job, so only raise it according to your own circumstances.
Are we back at the bear store?
How dare you. It's my favorite boss. Oh,
What's it? Does the bear have a name? What's his name?
it's Bear.
Okay, guy.
Okay then. Can he do it?
Why are you cheating with that girl? What's she doing? Get her out of here. Oh, it's like projectiles.
Oh. Oh.
Oh, he. Oh, good job. You won.
I was expecting I was gonna die. Next up is S2. By far the best and most general skill in his kit. What it does is expand his range to this weird shape, gives him melee attack speed, increases target count to 3 and makes him hit for 200% of his attack as physical damage. This first part is very solid. Bellone hits more enemies a lot harder inside a bigger area. All that on a 22 SP cost skill that lasts for 22 seconds, so you can generally spam the skill as much as you want. But it gets even better with the next effect. What it does is buff talent 1 while the skill is up, so Bellone is able to stack it up to 8 times instead of the previous 4, as well as applying 80% slow to mobs that have all 8 stacks. This means that while S2 is up, Bellone is able to reduce any mob's defense by 64% for 10 seconds as long as he attacks them 8 times, and as long as he keeps spamming the same enemy, that debuff will have permanent uptime until S2 ends. This is actually the strongest defense reduction in the game, finally dethroning OG Pramenix by 4%, though she still has some fragile in there, so I guess there's that. And because it's so high, Bellone can actually be used as a very effective defense debuffer for your team while also benefiting himself from it, since different from other debuffers like Shamir or Prem, Bellone's personal damage is very high compared to them. It's actually quite tricky to calculate it in his case, since talent 1 increases his damage the lower a mob's HP percentage is, meaning that the more total health they have, the longer it takes for him to reach his full damage bonus. Yes, bro is legit a HP descaler, but it gets to around 107k total, assuming the mob has that much HP. So you're even adding a ton of damage on top of the defense debuff for the rest of your team, and then 80% slow for mobs with full stacks. All this on a skill that, like I said, only costs 22 SP on a guy that costs 11 TP, which makes Bellone extremely effective, especially in the early game of most maps, since he can get to the field very quickly and easily cover multiple lanes while taking care of almost any elite that might show up. But he's also capable of dealing with even some bosses on the latter half of stages with little to no help from her team. For all intents and purposes, this skill has basically no real flaws in terms of what it proposes to do. It's the highest defense threat in the game on top of respectable damage, which is why some of you might be surprised, or not, depending on if you saw my ranking Future Ops video, when I say it's pretty meta-wise. Because basically defense reduction is only good as long as defensive values are close to your Ops attack, and once attack gets past that, it becomes exponentially less valuable to reduce a mob's defense instead of getting diminishing returns, which is a problem that disproportionately affects physical because of how it's calculated. Take Patriot as an example. He's considered a mob with both high res and defense. For res it makes sense since he has 90, so when he arts damage will get reduced by 90% unless the op has res shred and whatnot. For defense though, he only has 2.1k. And don't get me wrong, this is high, but I'm sorry, it's not high enough that it compares to having your damage reduced by 90% for most modern physical damage damage ops. And this is an aspect of the difference between arts and physical that I don't see many people talk about. Since defense is just a subtraction of our total damage, for it to have the same effect as res, which is percentage based, Hypergriff needs to keep increasing base defense values over time to compensate for power creep. And the side effect of that is what you see in Patriot, where for the time he released 2.1k defense actually felt equivalent to 90 res on DPSs of that era. But for modern ones, it just became a dummy target to test damage even on ops that have zero defense threat or ignoring their kit. And over time, as kits got more absurd with their numbers, everyone just kinda got used to not needing them, since nowadays most ops are basically expected to work even on bosses without relying on much external help. And only a few mobs nowadays even have the stats to make debuffing feel necessary for those modern ops. So when you combine those two facts, one of S2's main selling points loses a lot of its appeal. And the next problem has to do with smoothness. See, on paper the bigger numbers might make it sound like Bellone is the best physical debuffer in the game, which is true, but only if you're talking about how strong his debuff is. I mentioned Shamir before, who is usually considered the best defense debuffer, but the thing is that her numbers were never the highest for that niche since her release. Promenex always shredded a lot more defense than her, but the reason people rank Shamir above is the convenience her doll has, mostly because it can be placed in any tile in the map, and Shamir herself can recharge the skill while the doll is deployed, which makes it only have 15 seconds of downtime between deploys. When you look at Bellone though, he does have a stronger shred, 64% against Shamir's 50%, but it can only be applied to 3 mobs at once. He also doesn't have the doll's capacity to quickly be deployed in any tile. If you want to change his position, you have to manually do it and wait his redeploy time, or use something like X's S3. This isn't to say that Shamir is stronger though, because even if she does have much better convenience, that still doesn't take into account Bellone's insane CC, which more often than not will be more useful than her attack decrease, and most importantly his personal damage. 107k is far from being on the upper echelon of damage dealers nowadays, but it is infinitely higher than Shamir's almost zero, and maybe I'm sounding contradictory right now. Why would I even bring Shamir up if I think Bellone is overall better? Well, that's because of my next point, which is the fact that I don't think Bellone is really meant to be a pure debuffer. Up until now I've only talked about the debuff and his damage as two different parts of S2, but in reality they're actually a lot more complementary to each other. Take this clip for instance. Here you have a very basic setup. Bellone decreases defense and Exo deals more damage because of it, since Patriot's defense is very close to how much damage she dishes out, so it's that best case scenario I talked about earlier, while he also dishes his own. But a much simpler way to do this is to just... If I just replace everyone with Bellone and Dwarf, I get a much cleaner setup and basically the same results, since Bellone alone can kill both Patriot and all shields in his range with a lot of his S2 to spare. And I'm not trying to diss Exo here. The point is that instead of using Bellone like a debuffer or sub-DPS or whatever you wanna call him, you can also either replace him with buffers or other debuffers, or simply have him as the main DPS being supported by those same mobs. Basically treating his defense shred the same way as Wang's Resognor to help his personal damage instead of something like Ifrit's S3 to support others. Which isn't to say you can't do both. You saw how the Bellone plus Exo setup also managed to kill the boss. But treat his capacity to shred defense for the team more as one of the facets of his S2 rather than main appeal of the entire skill, as I usually see a lot of people do. If you do that, you'll see that this actually works really well as a main DPS skill. Like I said before, it doesn't quite reach the same level as the best physical damage dealers, so he's not gonna replace your Wizardel or Mulner if we're talking about meta. But for an 11 DP op on an archetype that was mainly used for just AFK, it is definitely a great option. So if you do decide to raise him, this is definitely the skill you want to prioritize.
I feel skill right now.
Oh!
This cringe. This cringe. There you go.
He dodged them! Oh my goodness!
He lost.
Oh!
Oh! Okay. Mr. Bellone,
Show
what did he
you.
do now?
Show you a magic trick, Demo.
Oh my god, why is Capper here? What's wrong with you?
I Scabber here because it's Scabber. Okay, Demo. How sure it needs to be.
Okay. Yeah, sure.
I'll make Sidamo, Sibelone here.
Yeah, yeah. He's killing the boss. Let's go.
No. I will now make him disappear.
Wait. Wait. Where'd he go? Sir. Where'd he go?
He's right
Oh,
here.
he's
Demo.
retreated. Oh wait, what? Did he just kill him? Wait, explain what happened.
No.
Oh, wait. Oh, wait.
What a magician to tell him his tricks, Demo. Lastly, then we have S3. This is Bellone's main DPS skill and by far the hardest one to use effectively in his kit. Something you can probably tell given how lengthy this text is. The first effects are the usual plus 170% attack and plus 50 attack speed. Pretty standard 6-star skill multipliers. But it's from the next one onwards that it gets a lot more unique, since it makes so all his hits have a 50% chance to increase their damage to 185% of attack. Very reminiscent to Talent 1, but with RNG this time. And then we have the next effect, which makes so when S3 is active, Bellone will search mobs inside the area you see on screen. And if they are on top of a deployable tile, he'll teleport on top of them. That way he's able to cover multiple areas despite only having the base brawler's range. In terms of pure damage, this is his best skill like I said, being able to hit around 200k damage per skill. Although do keep in mind that this number can vary a lot. First because he's talent 1 as we saw in the S2 section, but mostly because of that RNG extra damage his hits can deal. That's why I give you an estimation. But even that being the case, this S3 hits really hard for a single target physical damage skill, being comparable to something like Sakuko's S3 if you disconsider her fever mode. Although I don't think it's a really good idea to directly compare these two since they do damage in very different ways. But just talking about pure damage, this is very good. So given the chance, Bellone can easily shred any mob that crosses his path, with the only ones that can survive him in general content being bosses with very high damage reduction or extremely inflated HP pools. So far so good, right? You get absurd damage on a character with a defense threat, but it's from here that the problems start, with the first being the RNG in his damage. Like I just said, even when you account for that, Bellone's average total damage usually does make up for it, but that does become a bigger problem when we're talking about his time to kill mobs. And by that I don't mean Bellone takes forever like Lemon's S2 for instance, but more so that for Bellone the time it takes to kill enemies is much more important than most other ops, specifically because of the teleport. And to explain why I need to talk about his talent too. What it does is first give him 40% dodge against arts and physical. By itself this is really good. For a brawler who is constantly getting close to danger, especially if you're using his S3 to kill a bunch of mobs, this does help a lot with the damage he might accumulate over time. But if you've watched this video so far, you might be a bit confused as to why I didn't talk about this talent on the S2 section as I normally do. And the reason for that is because of the next portion of the talent that might look weird at first glance if you don't know how S3 works. What it does is increase the dodge to 80% after deployment and gradually decrease it back to 40 over the course of 20 seconds. And this might look weird because it means he only gets it for a short while after deploy, which is usually not that eventful to warrant this much dodge unless you purposely drop him inside a risky area. But it does make a lot more sense when you take his S3 into account, since that teleport I mentioned is considered a new deploy by the game, meaning that each time Bellone drops on a mob it will refresh back to 80%. And this extra dodge is crucial for S3 to work because it's the only form of defense Bellone has against strong elites and bosses when he teleports on top of them. And from this you can probably guess what the issue I was talking about is. RNG. This is why I said Bellone's time to kill mobs matter, because the longer he stays on the same tile, the more his dodge will decrease until it's back at 40%. Against elites this is still pretty manageable, although we do have some really scary ones like the chapter 16 mechs that I really don't think any non-tank ops should be getting close to, especially when they are in groups. But the main problem here is more against the bosses, because for as strong as Bellone is while S3 is up, he's not gonna be fast enough to kill a modern boss before they attack a few times. And as you would expect, fact, most of them can kill Bellone in just a few hits, sometimes even one-shotting him. So every extra dodge he can squeeze could very well be the difference between killing or be killed. That's why the decrease feels a bit counterintuitive, because if Bellone is taking longer than average to kill something, it probably means they are stronger than average mobs, and therefore are more likely to kill him. But the game just looks at that and decides to reduce his dodge. Another problem with the teleport is buffs. And I'm not talking about if the skill scales all with buffs or not, but rather about the fact that each jump Bellone makes also resets any buffs he might have. This is something you'll be familiar with if you've used Olpiana's S3 with someone like Warframe or Silver Shoulder, and it means you can't pair him with Warf if he starts moving all over the place. Although it won't be a problem if you just want to kill one mob, since a good aspect of S3 is that it only makes Bellone move when you first activate the skill, if he kills an elite or boss, and if he spends more than 1 second without attacking, meaning you can get around some of the annoyance quite easily, which is actually our next topic. It is possible to manipulate Bellone's S3 such as you want to move on top of a mob by deploying something on that tile like another operating device, or searching for mobs on top of undeployable tiles and giant bosses since those can't be blocked. If you do that, you can actually reap all the benefits from S3 without having to deal with the downsides I mentioned, since he will start attacking that target you want and become unable to fulfill that condition. The only small asterisk here is that you have to make sure no other mob is inside his search area when you first activate the skill, since that is one of the only 3 instances where Bellone will teleport. And a bit related to that, try to not let any trash mob get close if you want to focus on one specific target, since S3 doesn't have any priority targeting or anything like that. It will absolutely ignore a boss or elites because it thinks a random slug is more important to kill since it is closer to the blue box if you give it a chance. And because I know there are some people out there who think they're so smart, I think I should mention one last thing. Some of you probably think you can combo S3 with Silent Salter or Hoshiguma's S3 since they can make anyone immortal for a while, which should be just enough time for Bellone to kill most mobs, right? Well, guess what? It doesn't work. You thought you were so smart, didn't you? You see, S3 has a built-in feature that automatically retreats him back to his original position with 1 HP if he were to die. And the way Hoshiguma and Silence's immortality works is that it stops your ob's HP from falling below 1. So since Bellone's S3 already doesn't allow for that, they can't stop Bellone from retreating. To be fair, this is a good feature normally, since it will protect Bellone from retreating if he were to die. And this is such a specific interaction that I think it might have been on accident they made it like this, but the end result is the same. It makes so he can't be paired with ops that would be some of his best partners to make S3 last longer and kill the mobs you want. Now I hope you understand why I said S3 is so hard to use effectively at the start. At least half of this section was me teaching you how to get around S3's own mechanics. If you do everything right, this skill can be extremely effective, but that's why you can't always look at just the numbers to talk about a skill, and why I compare just his damage to Psychico's S3 and nothing else. They both can hit similar numbers, with Bellone actually being able to go higher than her if she doesn't have fever. But S3 has a very short range, so he has to be very close to the mob he wants to kill. The teleport feels like a demerit a lot of times, and if you want to use S3 you will have to try to get around it in a lot of cases, or else you will have to deal with both the damage and survivability RNG in here. That's why in many situations it's just better to use S2 and call it a day. So again, S3 can be very useful to some of you, but I don't recommend you invest into this skill unless you're prepared to put in the work. To answer what I said at the start of the video, Bellone is considered average because he doesn't excel in any coveted area like AFK. And where he is at the top, which is pure defense threat, is quite an outdated niche at this point, since the vast majority of ops nowadays don't care about it. And even in there he doesn't 100% beat Shamir yet because of her convenience, so there are still cases where she can replace him. As a DPS he actually does have a lot of strong points, but again he doesn't really excel in it. This isn't to say he is bad though. I do think Bellone is mid, but I mean that in the actual original sense of the word, which is middle. He's average. And if you just like him or got him by accident, he can be useful to you. S2 is just extremely general and fits everywhere. S1 can work in your account if you need a bit more of AFK, and for as much as I talked about needing to work around S3, it is possible. Bellone is definitely a very unique op, and if you think his kit does look fun, it might be worth the pulse. And if you want to see an actual evaluation of him compared to most future characters, I made this video ranking most of them that you can go watch. Just make sure to to join Discord, subscribe, comment, and leave a like before you go. And if you want to support me, get Discord privileges, early access to videos, or even appear on Neblana's special place, you can also consider becoming a member. I'll also think you're really cool if you do that.
俺の意見これはベローニの大将任せろ
That's it then. Bye.
まだ完璧とは言えないな戻ったら課題を洗い出そう